writing a book, etc., you need some sort of inspiration, something to think of to draw out your creative paths. I'll show you some examples of how robots are generally depicted in media and how those ideas are actually not that far off from what we actually design in real life. And to be very frank, some depictions have actually served as inspiration for many real life robots. Now, I want to keep this interactive, so I'll start off with a question to all of you. What do you think of when you hear the word robot? Now, I don't want technical definitions. We'll get to that in a bit. It can be a word, a phrase, or the name of a book or a film or any other fictional character that you're thinking of. Now, instead of me reading out all of your answers, there's a little better way. Just give me a moment. All right. Now, what you're seeing here is an interactive word cloud. Now, what I want you guys to do is go to this website over here, www.menti.com, and use a code over there. I want you guys to give a word, phrase, or name of a book or a film that describes, in your opinion, what the word robot means. You don't have to really think about it. What's the first thing, the first word, or the first thing that pops in your head when you hear someone speak the word robot, or when you read the word robot? I'll give you a minute or two so that you can give your answers in here. Okay, humanoid. Servant machine, yeah, that is kind of the definition of what a robot is, the what the word means. Iron Man, okay. Black Mirror, oh, I see some Netflix fans here. Automation, yeah, robotics are synonymous with automation. I, Robot movie, okay, that's a good one. Wall-E, yeah, in Wall-E is a bespoke robot. Wall-E again. Artificial humans, okay. Nice, lots of responses. Asimo, okay, yeah, that's a good example of a robot. Space probe, yeah. AI apocalypse. Okay, you won't go that far, but yeah, I mean that is one thing that people think of, the like the Terminator movies. Sophia, yeah. Sophia is actually the first robot that has gained citizenship. I think, if I remember correctly, Saudi Arabia. Matrix, nice. Okay, so I'll close the thing here. I've received a lot of good responses, so that shows that you guys are pretty well versed with what the word robot means and its representation in media. Just a moment. All right. Now I'll show you a few examples of different types of robots. The actually most of the examples, the answers that you gave, kind of correlate to the examples that I'm going to show, but I'll show them anyway. I'll show you the fictional representations and their real life counterparts. It's not an exhaustive list. Of course, there are many different fields, but it should give you enough of an overview of what the field has to offer. Okay, now I'll show you 4 examples and I want you guys to think about the element common to all of them. So there must be something, not just one element, a few elements that kind of are spread across all those examples. And I want you guys to tell me what those are. Now, I'm sure most of you know him. This is Optimus Prime from the Transformers films. I'm actually a big fan of the films. I used to watch them a lot when I was a kid. I still am a fan. Now, another similar example is this one. This is Gypsy Danger from Pacific Rim. If you haven't watched it, it's a brilliant action film. Now you can see Gypsy holding a fishing boat in his hand, and fishing boats are not small, so you can imagine how big Gypsy is. Now, apart from movies, I'm also a big anime enthusiast. So if you know what this is a Wing Gundam from Mobile Suit Gundam, another a brilliant anime. If there are any anime enthusiasts over here, you might also know of this little anime called Neon Genesis Evangelion, another brilliant anime, also focused on big, bulky robots like this. And of course, Power Rangers, the very first the very first place I actually saw something that I would come to know that it was a robot. I used to watch this a lot as a kid. Now, you'll notice a common theme in all four examples. They are big lumps of metal, and for the most part, they are piloted by human beings. Now, such robots are called mecha. Mecha. It's actually a shortened form of mechanical in a way. It's a Japanese, you could say, a Japanese invention, the name. And mecha are mostly humanoid, although there's no stopping someone from building a non-humanoid mecha. And a common application of mecha is to help us with lifting big, heavy objects. So you could think of it like someone just posted in the answers, but a lot bigger and a lot heftier. Now, as of today, there are quite a few mecha type robots in development right now. For example, you have Kuratas, Kuratas from Suido Bashi Heavy Industries. And Kuratas over here has been proposed for deployment in the military. So there's been a lot of, especially the US military, it's received a lot of proposals for further development. And you have Method V2 from Hankook Mirei. It's a Korean robotic startup, not startup or company. And this is also yeah, the Eagle Prime from Megabots. There's actually this show called Megabots where you see all sorts of big heavy mecha like Eagle Prime here. And the walking truck by General Electric way back in 1969. So imagine Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, and then you have people making mecha from that earlier time. It's also a four-legged mecha, like, and even Eagle Prime is one on track. So there's, like I said, there's no stopping anyone from making a mecha that is not humanoid in shape. Now we'll move on to the second category now. Now the next category of robots are designed to work in very special, very hazardous environments. Now, once again, I'll follow the same theme. I'll show you four examples.
Good evening,
Now,
sir.
okay. If you've watched a lot of Netflix, you must have come across these two robots, Mother from I Am Mother and Robot from Lost in Space. Now, both have very simple directives and they follow them to the best of their ability. For example, Mother's job is to protect the ship from whatever's outside and keep the inhabitants safe. And Robot's directive is to protect the astronaut family, the Robinsons, if I'm not wrong. So very simple directive.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt. Sir, if you have discussed anything before I came, can you please explain it to me afterwards?
Yeah, don't worry. I mean, if there are any questions you have, just type them in the WhatsApp group and I'll come back to them in the question and answer session at the end. All right. Anyway, yeah. Now, if you've watched Interstellar, you must know TARS. There's TARS and you have CASE, both space-related robots and both very similar in shape, form, and function. TARS is his main job. His main job is to help the astronauts on this ship. And when they are exploring on various planets, he helps them out with any task that they have to do there. And the last example here is Otto from WALL-E. Now, if you're, most of you kids must have watched WALL-E, and his main task once again is it's very simple. Is to just keep everyone on the ship alive. all the humans that are on the ship under him, he has to keep them alive. So maintaining oxygen levels, making sure they get ample food and water, recreational activities, etc., etc. Now, you must have guessed it already, but I'll say it anyway. There are once again common elements among all of them. They are all related to space or extraterrestrial stuff, and they have very simple directives that they follow without any question. Right? They cannot break those guidelines, those instructions that they've been given at all. Now, these robots are simply called space robots. Nothing, there's no fancy name as such. And as the name suggests, they are robots designed for extraterrestrial environments or for conducting hazardous exploration tasks on other planets like Mars, say, for suppose. Or if you're talking about our own solar system, let's say we send a rover to Mars, or say we send a lander to Venus. Now, of course, we also have real life counterparts, and this is probably the most well known field when it comes to general public exposure, mostly because of NASA. NASA is, I guess, the biggest player in the space robotics field. And as you can see here, you have Curiosity, part of NASA's Mars Exploration Rover program. That's what MER stands for. There have been a series of rovers, and Curiosity is just one of them. There's Robonaut 5 from NASA Johnson Space Center, and it's a robot designed to help astronauts, hopefully, on the surface of Mars. Now, and then you have the Canada arm. It's literally Canada plus arm, so Canadarm. It's it's an arm that has been put on top of the space shuttle. If you know the ISS space shuttle, to help the space shuttle deploy satellites while it's in orbit. So initially they had this problem where there actually has been an incident where one of the satellites did not function properly while it was being deployed from its payload compartment. So they developed this arm to help with literally pulling out the satellite and placing it into orbit. And lastly, you have FEDOR. FEDOR stands for Final Experimental Demonstration Object Research. This is developed by the Russian Space Agency, and it's not much of a field bot. It's more of an in-house research robot, so that any new research in, say, artificial intelligence or let's say robotics that the Russian Space Agency comes up with, they try it out on FEDOR and they see how the results show. We'll move on to the next category now. Now, this last category is very special. But before I explain what I mean, I wanted to take a look at these four examples again. Now, this is Sunny from iRobot. Someone mentioned iRobot. This guy is a robot who somehow develops human emotions, the capacity to feel human emotions. Then we have Wally from, once again, Wally. This guy is a garbage collection robot rather, who, like Sunny, is also capable of human empathy, of human emotions. And of course, if anyone here is a Star Wars fan, who can forget these two, R2D2 and C3PO. These two are also a very iconic duo, and they also display similar attributes like Sunny and Wall-E, the capacity to have a joyous conversation with humans and to simulate feelings rather. There are two very important elements I want to highlight here. The first one is empathy or simulation of empathy. All of the examples you see here demonstrate almost near human-like ranges of anger, sadness, almost all emotions. You, in, if you didn't know, if you didn't see them and they were talking to you on the phone, for example, you might mistake them for a human if you didn't see them, rather, that is. Now, the second element that actually, in my opinion, very finely differentiates them from space robots is that they are all deployed in human environments. Now, what do I mean by human environments? You might say that, well, Robonaut 5 is, or Feedor rather, is designed to help astronauts, right? But what these robots do is they are companion, you could say they are companion robots in that they are meant to be around humans in normal environments, say an office or your home. Sunny was designed to be a companion robot for the home, if you've seen the film. and compare them with space robots who they do help humans with their tasks, but their main purpose is robustness, or they're mostly intended to be fully autonomous. They're not you could say in their intention of design is not to work in a collaborative space with humans. Now these robots are called service robots. Some are also referred to as social robots, or like I said, companion robots, because of the companionship thing. And another name that can be used to describe them is collaborative robots, or more simply, cobots. It's a very loose interpretation of the term. If you look up the term cobots online, you might find a very different interpretation what I'm showing you here. But I feel this fits the description perfectly. Now, like I said, there are
Ma'am,
many.
sir, why are they called cobots? I did not understand.
Could you put your questions in the group? I'll answer them at the end. Don't unmute yourself. It'll disturb me while I'm giving the session. Just post them in the WhatsApp group, any questions you have, and then I'll answer them at the end. Okay. Okay. Now, once again, there are a lot of service robots in the industry right now in real life, and some can actually be bought for general use also. For example, this is Pepper by SoftBank Robotics. I've actually interacted with it myself in Hong Kong when I visited. It's a receptionist bot that people put in hotels, and you can interact with it, ask it questions like, I want lunch at this. What are the times for lunch? Or uh, give me a few places where I can sightsee. So stuff like that. It can talk with you and interact with you in that sense. Now, if anyone stays in Bengaluru right now, you might have seen this. This is actually the first robot restaurant in Bengaluru. And you have a table, and it's a tab actually. The tab is on the table. You put your orders in there, and then the robot comes and serves you that order. It's very interesting thing. And oh, yeah. And of course, if you've been following robotics for a while, or even if you don't, you probably have seen this Roomba, or a robot vacuum cleaner. I mean, I've seen ads of this thing on TV almost all the time. It's probably something that almost everyone knows about. And this is Dustcart. It's actually based off of Wall-E. So if you remember what I said, that some things in fiction actually serve as inspiration for things that we design in real life. So Dustcart is a direct example of that. They actually intended it they designed it off the idea of Wall-E. So a robot that cleans the streets. This is actually in Italy. So it cleans the streets, and you can actually kind of interact with it, like place garbage in front of it, and it will pick it up for you. Now, there are many more categories that I haven't introduced, like say humanoid robots, hyper redundant robots, etc., etc., etc. There's a lot of fields, but that is an exercise for you. Those are the most common ones, and I'm sure you'll be able to find them out by yourself. So a simple Google search, like I said. I want you guys to search them up by yourself and take a look at all the different types of robots that are there. Now, you've seen the vast array of robots that are out there and what the field has to offer. Now we are going to get to the more technical side of things, starting with what is a robot. Now, what can a robot do that can differentiate it from a simple machine, like a simple input process output? How is this thing different from what we define as a robot? And more importantly, a very important question is the difference between robotics and automation. This is a very hot topic of debate because people always confuse these two. Now, a robot, irrespective of what it does, can be described in very like sense, think, and act. So these three words are everything of what a robot does. So it senses things, it thinks of how uh, how to interpret that information, and finally it acts on them. Now, starting with sense, a robot is able to actively sense or perceive things around it. For example, what you're seeing here is actually the point of view of a self-driving car. So this is what, if you are a self-driving car, this is what you're actually going to see. So you can see how the cars, the guy over there, the children, they've been marked with yellow boxes. We call them bounding boxes in computer vision. And you can, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory why you would need to detect all them. I mean, they are obstacles, right? You wouldn't want to run over the man, for instance, or crash into the car. Now, a robot is also able to decipher what it sees in front of it and perform some sort of thinking process as to what the info it's obtained means. Now, what you're seeing here is a visual representation of something called a neural network. Now, a neural network is, you could say, the most basic uh, form of an AI, an artificial intelligence. Every single artificial intelligence you see can, in one way or the other, be boiled down to this system. You have an input, you have some sort of calculations that are made to that input, which you can see denoted by those layers there. And then you have some output, which is, it could be a decision, or it could be an action, it could be anything. It could also be some processing done to this image. So for example, if I were to give the example of the self-driving car again, what the car would get would just be a simple camera image, and what the tell the car ki, okay, the car's in front here and there's the footpath on the right side, so I should probably go left or reverse. Now that it has processed all these actions that need to be done, it needs a way for the robot to interact. I mean, sure, you've thought of all this. Now, how are you going to execute those actions? And more importantly, execute those actions by physically interacting with the environment in front of you. Now, the most basic way is through a gripper. So you can see this bomb disposal bot over here is picking up a bag. Now, there are many other types of grippers, not just grippers. It doesn't have to be just a gripper also. An action could also be something like, in the case of a self-driving car, you don't have grippers, right? But in case of a self-driving car, actions would be driving somewhere. Or in the case of, let's say Pepper, okay? So actions in the case of Pepper would be talking back to the human. So like, what is your room? What room number are you staying at? That is an action that Pepper does. So actions differ based on the type of robot, but in a way, they all end up with the robot actively interacting with the environment, be it speaking to the user or picking stuff up like here, etc. Now, what is the difference between a robot and an automatic process, like robotics versus automation? How would I use this distinction, this sense, think, act cycle to differentiate a robot from an automation process? For example, you've all of you have visited a Xerox machine, a Xerox shop rather, at some point in your life. Now, most automated processes are devoid of any adaptive thinking at all. So they don't sense or they don't think, they just act. You have an input, it just spits out an output. That's it. There's no thinking or any active sensing involved. So if you take the Xerox machine, for example, when we started up, when we put a paper in it, it doesn't know whether a paper has been put in there or not. I I mean, okay, if you take some really high-end machines, it'll probably just say, okay, there is paper or there is no paper, but that doesn't constitute human thinking. I mean, that's as simple as saying, if a paper is there, say yes. If paper is not there, say no. That isn't adaptive thinking in a sense. And okay, it'll run the scanner over whatever we've put, and then it'll just spit out the xeroxed copy. And also, one more argument to say that why this doesn't constitute thinking is, if the Xerox machine were able to think, would be able to display some sort of artificial intelligence, it would have made some efforts to try and clean up the scan that it has done. Now, if you've seen Xeroxes, you must have seen all those black lines that go across the page, and I mean, they kind of defeat the point why you even went there in the first place. So an intelligent, or you could say an artificial intelligence enabled Xerox machine would be able to remove those black lines and kind of clean up the image for you before printing it out. But most Xerox machines or like most appliances in that regard don't exhibit any stuff like this. So they are relegated to automation processes. So I hope the distinction is clear. If you haven't understood, I can come back to it at the end of the session during the question and answer session. All right, now we'll be starting off with the longest section. So buckle up. How do you design a robot? Okay, now that we know what a robot is and how it's different from an automation process, how do you go about designing it? Now, it's a bit funny, but the design process almost directly mirrors the sense, think, act cycle. Actually, any engineering design problem, it mirrors this sense, think, act cycle. So you sense something around you. You sense that, okay, there is a problem which I, as an engineer, can maybe solve, maybe through simple engineering or by designing a robot. Then you think, you plan, okay, these are the certain factors that I need to look out for while I'm designing my robot, and how will I go about it? If I were to deploy it, where would I deploy it? How would I deploy it? So all this comes in planning, the think cycle, and then you act. You actually get your hands dirty and you design. You create math models. If you're mechanical engineer, you'd probably end up fabricating most of the stuff that you're doing. So this is what I mean by the sense, think, act cycle directly mirroring the engineering design process. And first off, before starting off in any technical project, you need to set a goal. You need to set a clear set of objectives. Like even if you play games, right, you have a certain set of objectives. Get from point A to point B. Do these tasks along the way. So what I'm talking about in technical terms is a problem statement. Now, a problem statement is a formal expression, you could say, a formal, uh, yeah, a formal proposal, rather, a formal problem proposal that specifies, that clearly demarcates what the problem is, what are the various factors that are affecting the problem. So, okay, this is the problem that we need to solve. These are the factors due to which this problem is arising. So these are the factors that I'm talking about. And lastly, if if it ever happens that this problem gets solved, let's say this factor A is solvable by our solution, are there any new problems that come out? So to summarize, what is a problem that we need to solve? Why is the problem existing? So all the factors that I talked about, factor A, factor B, factor C, that contribute to why this problem is so difficult that we actually need engineering to solve it instead of simple human effort. And how is the problem solvable? So as an engineer, what would you design or what would you create? Let's say a robot, not just a robot, even a simple engineering application to solve that problem. And more importantly, where can new problems be created? This is actually a very important point, and it falls under a lot of fields, not just engineering, but also ethics. Because, I mean, to give an example, let's say you design a bridge, right? A bridge to cross a river, and there are some factors. You do all your engineering stuff and you build the bridge. But the problem that arose was while building the bridge, you ended up decimating the ecosystem over there. So do you, I hope you're understanding what problems, what do I mean by new problems? So, okay, you build the bridge, but at what cost? You, it's like you scored a victory, you solved the problem, you won the war, but at what cost? So it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory. So that is what we as engineers need to mitigate, we need to reduce. It's more of a human obstacle, not one of numbers, in fact. Now, I'll get into the details of each field, rather, artificial intelligence, electronics, and mechanical. These are the main fields that come into the design of robots in general. There are there are some other fields like ethics, which mostly come into play with companion robots, but those aren't very defining on the design process itself. Those are things that happen after you've already designed everything. So those are just things that you take into consideration. So starting off with AI, you first devise an algorithm. Now AI is hardcore coding. So you design programs, you design your artificial intelligence to perform the think cycle. And so to do that, you first have to devise an algorithm, a set of steps that you can follow while you're coding. Now, it's a pretty basic thing to do and something that anyone who has a programming background has been trained in. Before you solve any problem, you make an algorithm to solve. You make an algorithm and then you code accordingly. And then you figure out that, okay, there are some bugs in this code and we'll debug them accordingly. Now, after you figure out an algorithm to solve that problem, you then select a model. Now, what is a model with respect to artificial intelligence? This is what I was talking about, the neural networks. Now, there are many ways you can design neural network. There are many types of neural networks also. To give an example, you can look these terms up, CNN, convolutional neural network, RNN, recurrent neural network. So these are all different models that pertain to different tasks, and your selection of model is actually dependent on the algorithm. So if you design your algorithm wrong, then you select your model wrong, and so all your effort is going to be for naught. Now, after you select your model, you have to train it and test it. Now, what I mean by training and testing is an artificial intelligence is still an intelligence, right? So to give it a human angle, it's like you're a kid and you study for you study something. Let's say you're studying science from one textbook and you're tested on stuff from that textbook. So yeah, since you've read that textbook, you'd score pretty good. But what if you're tested on stuff that is outside of the textbook? So you've only been training yourself to answer according to your knowledge that you've gotten from this textbook. Now, how do you answer stuff that is outside the textbook? So you'd probably make some deductions that, okay, this concept kind of ties into what is being asked. So I have some confidence that the decision I'm making, the answer I'm writing is correct for that question. So this is what I'm talking about training and testing. So uh, you train the model to you train the model with something called a data set, which is like a set questions like the textbook. You have questions this, the answer is this. So it'll learn all that. Then you kind of test it. So you give it stuff outside of what it has learned, and you see how confident it is by answering those questions, by how confident it performs in that test, how confidently it performs in those tests. And then you tweak it accordingly. So you tell the model, okay, see, you answered this with, say, you are 80% confident that the answer you gave was correct, but actually it's wrong. So you need to tweak accordingly. And all this is I won't get into the details of it because it's actually out of the scope of this session, but you can look it up. And lastly is visualizing all this in ROS. Now, to those who don't know what ROS is, ROS stands for Robot Operating System. It's uh, it's a special type of software called a middleware. What it does is it integrates. It's an integration software, you could say. So, say the model that you've made, the model that you've selected, trained, and tested. How do you implement it without going directly into the real world? So you want to create for yourself a controlled environment where you can observe how your model works, and more importantly, what are the various factors that can make the model fail, finding out ways in which the model can fail, and then accounting for them in your inside ROS. But I'll get to it when I come to those sections. Now, starting off with electronics. Now, similar to AI, you start off with an algorithm. Now, this is more toward electronics engineer. You probably know what I'm talking about. Those those who know, uh, electronics as a field deals mostly with circuit design, like actually coding and driving those motors. And that's what the MCU means. That stands for microcontroller unit. Now you need to, just like an AI model, you have an electronics model, which is kind of you're designing the circuitry of the robot, the circulatory system of the robot, if you want to give it a human angle. And you need to very accurately predict the forces the to put into this motor at this point in time. So if I were to say talk about a self-driving car, now each wheel has a motor, and if I want to turn left, I need to put more power on this side and less power on this side. So stuff like that is what an algorithm in electronics is supposed to mean. Now, after this, once again, you select a model. Now, this model is related to motor control. There are actually a lot of motor control models, such as um, this is very technical. PID control, which is proportional, integrative, and derivative control, uh, velocity control, position control, etc., etc. Now, this falls into a field called control theory, which is actually university level, so I won't go further into it. Circuit design is you're literally figuring out how to layer wires inside the robot, because a major concern is space. Even when, say, the laptop that I'm presenting this on, the reason this even exists is because electronics engineers were able to very efficiently pack all the electronics that are required into this very small, I think it's 1 foot by 1 foot area. Now, if you look up very old images of computers, like say ENIAC, ENIAC, ENIAC used to span an entire floor, like an entire auditorium floor. Compare that to this 1 foot by 1 foot laptop over here. So optimizing designs to reduce space and also improve efficiency, electronics efficiency is what I'm talking about. Now, motor control is, like I said, you select a model, a motor control model, and this is you're actually coding the motors for it, and which help you with not only creating the model but also simulating it and analyzing it. Like if most engineers over here will recall MATLAB or Mathematica, and yeah, those are the two most used software. Even for circuit design, there are a few more softwares which can be used to do the same thing as with motor control. You can draw the circuit literally in the software, and you can test it to see whether not much heat is being generated, because heat is also a very important consideration, especially when you're talking about space robotics, because over there, say you're sending a rover to Mars, the rover is all alone. So you want your electronics to be as robust as possible so that it doesn't just fail. It actually happened with I'm guessing Chandrayaan, when it went to the moon. It toppled over. I think it toppled over and it lost contact. It lost communication. So how would you, as an engineer, think of that edge case? That was an literal edge case. So stuff like that. And lastly, microcontroller coding. Now, the microcontroller is, you could say, the brain of the robot, and it, like our brains, what it does is it sends signals to all parts of the body, or all parts of the robot in this case. And using the microcontroller, you take care of communication. So let's say you have a lot of different appliances. So let's say in this room, I have my laptop here, I have my phone to my side, and outside this room, there is my Wi-Fi router. So all these three have to communicate with each other using Wi-Fi. So that is actually taken care of using a microcontroller in a sense. And then they also send signals to the motors. So, okay, motor one will get, say, 0.5 watts of power. So stuff like that. Now, after you do all this, once again, you put this into ROS, like I said, electronics should their control model in whatever electronics model they've devised. Mechanical will put their design in. I'll get to that in a moment. But AI and electronics in ROS, what they do is the AI, say if we take a self-driving car, very popular example, AI will electronics has a camera, and that camera will send some camera image to the AI model. AI model will give do its thing, spit out an output. Now this output, the microcontroller will interpret that output and accordingly give some signals. Now, doing all this integration is done in ROS, and AI takes care of the model part, and electronics takes care of the motor control part in ROS. Now, getting into the mechanical side, mechanical also has an algorithm, but its algorithm is actually it's not a right word, but I've just put it for uniformity here. By algorithm, we are talking about a checklist. A checklist containing things like, say you're designing a door, right? A simple door. The list will go like number one, material. Number two, where's the hinge, where you're going to put the hinge. Number three, how big you want the door to be, how thick you want it, etc. Stuff like that. You then prepare a mathematical model of this robot. So like in the algorithm, the mechanical algorithm, you think about all this stuff. So if it's a robot, if it's a robotic arm, for example, you think about, okay, I want my arm to be this long and I want it to move this much, and it needs to pick up, say, 10 kgs of 10 kgs of something. So you think about all this in the algorithm, and then based on that, you do some math models. Now math is everywhere. So if you don't like math, well, anyway, maths is everywhere, even in AI, electronics, and mechanical. The model selection that you do is very heavily dependent on math. Even the implementation is dependent on math. And for mechanical, the mathematical model is essentially creating a free body diagram. If you guys have remember your Newton, your classical mechanics, you probably have remember stuff like you create a free body diagram, then you put force like this force acts here, this force acts here, third law of motion and all that. Uh, so a free body diagram of sorts where you make expressions for, you make mathematical expressions for velocity, acceleration, a force acting at this point, angular velocity, stuff like that. Now, after you do this, you have a general idea of how much force a robot would be experiencing at some point in time. And once you do that, you get, this is when you actually get into design. Why? Because if you, it so happens that you design something that is actually perfect to fit the task, but it's not strong enough, or it's too impractical when it comes to the math model. So maths is actually a very good foundation for you to base your assumptions off. So if we take the door example again, if I say that in the math model, if I make that free body diagram thing, I'll say that the door only swings. There's no um, it doesn't have to receive, like you won't hit it with a hammer or anything, right? So you can go easy on the material and take a very light material so that it's easy for the door to swing around. So stuff like this is what you take into account when you're getting into mechanical design or engineering design, and you design the robot itself, its shape, its dimensions, how big it is, etc., etc. Then you perform something called finite element analysis, or FEA for short. This is actually done to check whether your design is actually strong enough to withstand the forces. So so math model is kind of making an assumption, design is acting on that assumption, and FEA is validating that assumption. So you will, as a mechanical engineer, if you're designing not just a robot, even as a mechanical engineer in general, you would cycle between these 3 points: math model, design, FEA. Even for AI, your model selection, training, and testing. So you'd cycle through those. For electronics, you'd cycle through this entire list: model selection, circuit design, motor control, MCU coding. You'd cycle through all those. Now, once you've validated your results through FEA, you then get down to actually fabricating those things. Fabricating as in making the parts. Actually, like going to a workshop and kind of cutting all parts from metal sheets and stuff. And over here, so something called computer assisted manufacturing, or CAM, is something that helps us a lot, especially considering this. If you consider this current pandemic situation, you wouldn't want to risk your life, risk your health rather, and go outside and do a workshop. What you can do is, you can tell, you phone a friend, say at the workshop, and say that, can you let me use your CNC? Now, what am I talking about here? A CNC is a name of a machine. CNC stands for computerized numerical control. What it does is, if you've ever seen, if you've seen videos of workshops, you'll see them working. You'll see them actually cutting stuff by hand. Now, this thing does it automatically through code. Manufacturing, where you yourself, or say the machine that you're doing your manufacturing, or to Berlin, say in Germany, and tell the guy over there, see, this is the CNC code that I want. These are the design files for the part that I'm making. Make them on the CNC that you have over there. Then he'll put the code that you have sent into the CNC in his workshop, and then he'll make it. So this allows for outsourced, like a very collaborative workflow, because you can collaborate in a single area or single place. Something that actually, now, once you've actually made all this stuff, you should, this doesn't apply to engineers, to your boss, the builder. You would want to showcase it if this product, many of the buildings and like images of people walking around. This is what I mean by animation. You can show this product to investors in case you want more money to further upgrade or further push this thing that you made to mass production. Like, for example, if I was an engineer and I wanted to build something like the robot waiter at the Bengaluru restaurant, right? I'd do all this stuff, and I would make an animation where you have a restaurant, a guy on a table, and you would animate the robot actually traveling from the kitchen to this table. So this is a good way of this animation thing you can actually do before CAM. You don't have to actually fabricate the part for displaying it. You can just make an animation because you've already made a design, right? You can just animate the design and show it to investors so that you can push for mass production or etc. Now, all these three things together are a parallel process. So it's not like first AI does its thing, then electronics does its thing, then mechanical does its thing. They all work parallelly. Now, it does happen that some things can't happen without the other. For example, AI and electronics, right? They test their stuff in ROS, but what do they test it on? They have to test their models on the robot, right? But if mechanical doesn't make the design, how will they simulate that design in ROS? So over here, even if they complete the entire workflow, if mechanical doesn't design their robot, they are left helpless. I mean, they can't do anything. Similarly, mechanical can make the fabricate the entire robot, but if electronics doesn't tell them, ki, okay, see, this is our circuit design and we require this much space, mechanical can't proceed further, because what if electronics needs like 1 meter square of space, but mechanical has designed something that has rather only 1 foot square. So there are things that people need, that engineers need to work one after the other. So it differs. It's of one more thing that I wanted to say is, this is not a exhaustive list. I've only given a very general uh, overview of each single workflow. So don't take this, what I'm saying here, as this is how it's supposed to be. Everyone has different work processes. And I mean, I myself have worked in different teams where with vastly different workflows. Like um, before we like one team I worked in, we just started designing and then we figured out the math model and everything as we went along. And the another team I worked in with was we did everything on the whiteboard. We planned everything before we actually went to even step two. So we spent like a lot of time working on just the algorithm before we even went forward with implementation of the algorithm. So everyone has different workflows, and it's up to you in the end where how you want to work as an engineer or as a team. Now, like I said, the design process is just a general one, and not just a design process, even the type of work that you're doing for each step will differ based on the type of robot that you're trying to make. Now, I'll explain with a few examples. Here you can see 5 examples over here. Now, firstly, there's another rover, Perseverance. This is actually the latest rover that NASA has sent over to Mars in 2020, actually, if I remember correctly. Now, rovers are meant to be very robust and to be able to survive the hostile conditions of Mars. So, I'd say the design is more mechanically oriented as opposed to AI or electronics, because it doesn't need to happen that you have like a really good electronic model and AI model, but the rover is so flimsy that the moment it touches the surface, it goes poof. So I would say, in my opinion, it's more of a mechanically intensive robot. You have to pay more attention to the mechanical side. Now, over here, what you're seeing here is a battle space preparation autonomous underwater vehicle, BPAUV. This is actually a military grade autonomous underwater vehicle for reconnaissance, for recon, scouting. And over here, I would say this is more AI and electronics based, because I mean, mechanically wise, it's just a simple hull, it's just simple cylinder that you have to design. But when it comes to AI and electronics, you have, of course, since we're talking about the ocean here, you have underwater currents, then you have like rocks that come up in the middle, like underwater mountains is a thing. I didn't know until I actually read about BPAV. Uh, and also more importantly communication, because it's a scouting bot, so how will it report what it has found to central base? So communication, actually seeing and detecting stuff that's there, and control is what I feel are more important in the case of an for AUV. Now, what you're seeing here is Atlas. The third example here is Atlas, which is a humanoid robot by Boston Dynamics. Boston Dynamics is actually a very popular robotics team, and they participate every year in something called the DARPA challenge. It's actually a very interesting challenge. You should watch it if you get the chance on YouTube, where they have all the participants have autonomous robots which have to perform certain tasks, like literally human tasks, like you can see these robots literally get into and drive a car until some point, get out, turn a lever, do lots of very many other tasks. Now, this, in my opinion, is actually you can't really decide in whether this is more mechanics or electronics and AI, because this is, I would say, the culmination of robotics, making a robot that is as close to a human as possible. And Atlas is a very good example of it, because if you see videos of it on YouTube, you'll see it doing some really crazy stuff like backflips and jumping over stuff, parkour, running. I mean, stuff that even I can't do, Atlas can do. So, in a sense, it's ensuring ensuring motor control, or like making sure that the robot is humanoid enough as in the design is enough for the motors to actually showcase the full potential, for the robot to showcase its full potential. And also AI, because you have to, the while it's running or while it's doing all these things, the robot has to see where it is going, right? Similar to a self-driving car, it needs to see where it's going. So over here, I hold AI, electronics, and mech in equal importance. There's nothing, in my opinion, which is more important in this case. Now, the fourth example is PC-1, which is an autonomous, not just autonomous, it's also a quadcopter, like you can see here, in use by the US Army, once again for scouting, like BPAV. And once again, this is more of a like BPAV, it's more AI and electronics based, But over here, from the mechanical point of view, all the examples I showed till now were land based. Now this is the only example I've shown here which is related to the air. And over here there's something you have to take care of, something called aerodynamics, which is what you also take care of when you're designing planes, helicopters and all. Now that's an entirely different workflow of its own, so I won't go into it here, but it's kind of an extension of the FEA process. It's just what you would normally do for an FEA process is doubled. The amount of time you have to put in is doubled, because since you're designing an aerodynamic craft, you have to make sure that the airflow through the blades, through the propeller blades, are moving fine. Because it does happen that even if a propeller blade is 1 degree off the intended design, the the drone flips. I mean, I've designed drones myself, so I'm saying from experience. Okay. And finally, we have, this is the most popular example of what we see on TV, apart from rovers. This is an industrial arm. And what you're seeing here specifically is the Fanuc R2001 IA. This is a welding arm. A welding arm, as in, if you've seen most videos of robotic arms working, you will almost always see them working in an automotive factory. That is because automotive factories are actually the largest, you could say, field where you see robotics, because there's actually a lot of stuff to be done on a car. Even as a very small car, if you take a nano, a car of that scale still has a lot of things to be done with, and something, a level of precision which humans can't do. I mean, to some extent. I mean, you can't mass produce a lot of handmade cars and expect all of them to perform as designed. So this is where industrial robots play a big part. This specific one is a welding robot, and what it does is uh, the doors that you put in, or like all the little metal things that you put on top of the car body, it welds them together. And you also have a spray painting variation of this, where it's literally just spray paints the car with the paint that is chosen. Now, once again, there are many more examples you can take from the robots we talked of earlier. For example, Pepper would rely more heavily on AI to talk to people. Actually, it uses a specific field of AI called natural language processing, NLP, which is, like the name suggests, detecting the language, extracting meaning from it. So, uh, if I were to give you an example, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Now, you as a human, you would process these words, you'd extract, okay, you have two things over here, a fox and a dog. And what is the fox doing? The fox is jumping. Where? Over the dog. So for us, this is very intuitive, but for a AI, it is a horrendous task. There are actually many funny videos actually on YouTube where you actually, one example that I can give you here is an AI actually wrote a Harry Potter fan fiction, and it's absolutely hilarious. It makes zero sense. The grammar is correct though. The grammar it follows grammatical structure, but there is no meaning to the sentences that it's outputting. So that's one example. Or if you take dust cart. Now, a dust cart is very similar to a self-driving car in the sense that it autonomously travels the streets, and you have to detect garbage cans. So it'll go towards the garbage cans and then pick them up and put them somewhere else. So all these examples have different considerations, different concepts to look into while you're designing. And there are many more examples that you can look up online, but I will leave them as an example to you again. All right. Now, with this, we are going to come to the final session, our final section of our session today, which is the Q&A session and an open discussion. Now, before we proceed with the open discussion, I'll first answer any questions that you must have had. I'll just go through the group. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can post them in the WhatsApp group. How to make math model? Oh, that's going to need another 1 hour session. uh, Now, okay, to give you a very simple explanation, like I said, the math model differs for each field. So if you're talking about, I'll give mechanical because mechanical is the easiest to explain. Um, so let's say that you're design. Okay, let's say you're designing this phone right over here. Now you would while designing you would probably think, okay, the phone, let's say the phone is of some mass, right? And the phone is of some mass, then uh, if you've done your class 10 and all, you'll probably figure out how to make a free body diagram. So the mass is of m, then you have gravity acting downwards like this, and then if I'm picking it up, my force is acting upwards like this. So this is a very simplistic example. There are actually many more. There's actually entire field of mathematical modeling that actually you should look into. There are actually lots of videos on YouTube once again where you can see where they actually explain uh, how a math model is created, because a math model is not just calculating forces, it's also if I were to give an example, if we give the door again, you would a door is a very simple rotation problem, right? Because the door is fixed at one place, and you rotate it. So to put it in simple terms, you have a point here, then you have the door here, the door swinging like this. So you'd mark the angle it's turning by, say, theta, and how fast the door is moving. You'd give it omega, something like that. So it's getting very technical. So I mean, I hope you've understood what I'm talking about. It's actually uh, very, very vast. So I actually suggest you should look up on it. Can you elaborate on MCU coding? Okay. Now, before that, MCU stands for microcontroller unit, and the most you could say famous microcontroller is an Arduino. Everyone has heard of an Arduino at some point in time. Even if you're not in robotics, I mean, there's always that one kid in class who's done all this fancy stuff. I mean, when I was in school, there was this one guy who did all this fancy stuff on Arduinos and all that. So that is actually how I got interested. And the microcontroller is the brain of the robot. So it deals with first of all receiving signals. Now these signals can be from anywhere. So even this computer that I'm presenting it on is kind of a microcontroller, because so the inputs is receiving is the camera feed and the audio feed, what I'm talking right now. It will then do something, and then it will send it over to the Wi-Fi, and that is how you are able to receive it. So your phone or your laptop is also a microcontroller in the sense that it will receive this feed that I'm transmitting, and then it will display it on your screen. So this is a basic example of what a microcontroller is capable of, and how to code is once again something for another session. Yeah. Is it required to learn mechanical engineering before robotics? Not necessary. I mean, okay. Uh, Not mechanical engineering, but maths. Now, when we usually the maths that is required in robotics, actually, it's a very funny thing. If you take any introductory robotics course in college, BTech or MTech rather, almost all of them are offered by computer science departments. It's a very weird thing, but why? Because the initial things I were to give a few topics: rigid body motion, kinematic. Yeah, so this stuff is taught by the computer science department. But the funny thing is, as you get more advanced into the mathematical modeling behind robotics, it goes more towards the mechanical side. So say dynamics, trajectory generation. So stuff like this is more towards the mechanical side than the computer science side. But it's still taught in computer science departments, which is I don't understand it. But yeah, to answer your question, it's not a requirement. It's not a requirement to learn mechanical engineering. You can actually start with any engineering. I've actually in our very own I Mechatronics, we have what, a civil engineer who's working on a tech project with us. So you just have to have a willingness to learn, and the information you get it from anywhere. A simple Google search is all it takes. TensorFlow is it's actually an AI based thing. It's a, if I would put it very simply, it's an application interface or a programming interface, which you will mostly find this term being thrown around with respect to image processing. Now, image processing isn't, to be honest, it's not my field of specialization, so I can't really comment on it further. But TensorFlow is related to that field. So actually, to do TensorFlow, what people usually do is they learn Python and they learn basic AI before they branch out further into image processing. And do we need to create our own algorithm? Okay, yeah, this is not required because, like I said, actually, robotics from the AI field is very, very well established. Actually, the first things, the first advancements in robotics actually came from the AI side. If you take, say, image processing, for example, uh, simple things like color recognition or hand detection. So the camera feed, it can the laptop will take camera feed of my hand and it will actually draw the outline of a hand. That is something that's possible using something called OpenCV, which stands for Open Computer Vision. Now, there are a lot of pre-made algorithms, pre-made coding libraries that you can just plug and play. Making your own algorithm is actually something that's on the level of a research project, and it's actually not really required in a sense. But if you want to, then well and good. I mean, it does, in my opinion, it's a good idea to start off by making your algorithm and then comparing it with one that has already been done. So you know where you've gone wrong, and it will help you grow more as an individual, skills wise. Oh, okay. There's a follow up to this. Start k-means, clustering, TensorFlow. This. Yeah, yeah. What you're talking about, k-means clustering and all, that is actually that's a kind of different aspect of robotics, but sorry, not robotics, AI. But it's up to you. I mean, these are all specific topics, and uh, it's up to you to figure out what flow you want to go through while you're learning. There's no set thing. And field of mathematics, okay, for okay, well, there are to specialize yourself in a specific field. It's not a necessity, but it's good to specialize in one field. So for AI, usually we deal with statistics and probability because you have to manipulate a lot of data and also to gain inferences from that data. So knowing your statistics and probability is very important in that sense. For electronics, it's more of, I think, mm, algebra. Getting good in algebra, and similar with mechanical algebra. Actually, if you get if you want to go into robotics, algebra, linear algebra, which is like matrices and all that, uh, calculus. Actually, to be honest, if you're good in your entire whatever 12th portion that you have or 10th portion that you have of for maths, if you're good in that, that is enough. The rest you will learn as you're going along. It's not that you have to learn all this then you can get in. So in for me, I started with robotics, then I actually learned all the maths that came along with it. Okay, you said that robots can sense, think, and act. Should we be worried about the thinking part? Oh, okay, the AI apocalypse angle. Okay, let me give you an example. Um, let's say we design a robot and we tell the robot to make ice cream. So that is the only thing that's its only task, make ice cream. And we don't even tell the ingredients, we just tell it make ice cream. And we give it something in front of it. So we'll just give the basic ingredients for ice cream. Then the robot starts making ice cream. Now, once the ingredients finish, what does the robot do? It only knows how to make ice cream for humans. So the one angle that the robot can think is, okay, I have to make ice cream, but I don't have any ingredients. but I have to make this ice cream for the humans. Now there are two ways I can do this. One, get more ingredients to make more ice cream, which clearly isn't possible because there aren't any ingredients in front of me. Or two, remove the humans, because if there are no humans, then there is no ice cream requirement. So uh, to answer your question, there is a very low possibility that that AI apocalypse thing is going to happen, because robots are still AI rather is very heavily dependent on human intervention. What we as humans do is actually the only thing left in AI right now as a field, in my opinion, is setting rules, setting boundaries for what the AI can do. Like in this case, if we just told the AI to make ice cream, not how it can achieve that purpose, make ice cream for humans. So it can go one way also, like getting more ingredients, or it can go the other way also, kill all the humans that there's no need for ice cream. So humans will very much be there if you're thinking about like a jobs perspective or like a career perspective. So humans will mostly be tasked with managing AI rather than being replaced by it. We'll probably be working together in the near future. Views about utility of ISRO's Vyomitra. Actually, to be honest, I haven't followed Vyomitra that much, but uh, I would say it's good. I mean, ISRO knows what they're doing. I mean, we've got what, like 100 PhD holders is sitting in one room. Obviously, something good is going to come out. Which programming language will you prefer for AI and robotics? Okay. Okay. Now there are. I'll give two answers to this. One, do you want ease of programming, or do you want speed? Now, for ease of programming, everyone uses Python because there are pre-made libraries for Python for anything. If it's maths, you have NumPy. If you have like image processing and like basic neural network stuff, data science stuff, you have scikit.learn. There are a lot of other things which are very well defined in Python. But a problem with Python as a language is it is horribly slow execution time wise when you compare it to to a language like C or C++. Usually designing something in C++ will give you, in my opinion, at least 10 times 10 times faster execution times as compared to Python. Only thing is you have to code everything from scratch, but if you're ready to do it, it's very good actually. While making robots, why use legs? And wheels are more easy and efficient. Okay, this depends. This is actually depending on the terrain. So say you're comparing Atlas and Curiosity. Okay, now uh, Curiosity can traverse hills, Atlas can traverse hills, but can Curiosity climb steps? It can't. It can to some extent, but it'll do a very bad job at it. Whereas Atlas, since it's designed just like a human, it can just like step over the steps. And also, having legs gives you a not it gives you a higher level of mobility, high level of dexterity, but also uh, yeah, dexterity, but also it comes with it the problem of control. Controlling wheels is easier than controlling legs. What do you think about working out AI and quantum computers? Oh, quantum computers. Actually, I am not well versed with this question, so unfortunately, I can't answer it. But I will look it up, and if I do find an answer, I'll put it. How can okay? TensorFlow is a platform. This is this, I guess. Will the jobs of data scientists unsecured after robots and AI? Like I said, our role as humans with relation to AI right now is just managing the rules and making sure that the AI doesn't do something very weird, like setting good rules and actually AI isn't sentient enough at all. I mean, even Sophia, which is I think the most advanced AI in a sense right now, can't do anything. I mean, even all her actions are actually done because of the human engineers that are behind her. So there is in within this century at least there is a very low possibility of like the Terminator type thing happening. Okay. How much of electrical engineering? Like I said, it's up. There's no like requirement. actually, since we are talking about fields of engineering over here, uh, there is there's this field called mechatronics, which I'm currently doing BTech in mechatronics engineering. What this does is it takes the best parts out of every field. So computer science, electronics, mechanical, many other stuff. So mechatronics as a name is mechanical plus electronics. So mechatronics, and there are many colleges in India, not just India, even abroad, that are picking up on this mechatronics trend. For example, Manipal, MIT Manipal has a BTech in mechatronics engineering and a MTech in robotics and automation. So I'm currently in my third year pursuing my mechatronics engineering degree. So if you're really interested in robotics, I would suggest pursuing a mechatronics engineering degree. Only one thing is that if you pursue mechatronics engineering and then you try and apply for say electrical engineering job or a mechanical engineering job, there might be a problem where you won't be preferred over a person who's pursued that degree. So if you're a mechatronics engineer and there's a mechanical engineer with you, both are applying for a mechanical engineering position, it may happen that the mechanical engineer will get it because I mean he's studied that field for 4 years, so he might be more specialized in it. But it depends. Okay, need to learn GUI for AI robotics. How we make our algorithm, like I've said, pre-made libraries, and if you want to, that's actually on the level of a research project, which frankly we don't, us kids don't have the experience to do so. All right, so yeah, it's tiring answering all these questions. We'll now move on to the most exciting part of this session, in my opinion, which is the open discussion. Now, I want you guys, I'm going to keep this open. I mean, you guys can unmute your mics and speak. And the topic of this is making robotics local. By making robotics local, I'm talking about how would you, as a person or an individual, introduce robotics in your local community, or um, how do you implement robotics or implement learning of robotics? How do you spread the idea or learning of robotics in your community? So for this, you guys can unmute your microphones and start speaking if anyone has any inputs to give. Okay, so I'll just start the kick-off discussion. So, uh, so if we are talking about making robotics local, what I would, what some ways I can think of is, first of all, uh, is finding out whether there are people who are interested around you. So not just if they're not interested, I mean, if they, it does happen that you are not interested in a field because you don't know about it. So like if for my case, I got to know about robotics when I was in my first year of engineering in college. So for those of you who, I mean, who are still in school and still have interest in robotics, props to you. I mean, it's very good for you. But and first of all, and after you kind of find out a group, not just a group, even if you can't find a group, you can make your own, where you find people that are like-minded and want to learn more about robotics. Even if you don't work on a robot, spreading the knowledge of robotics is actually very essential in today's scenario, because because all of you are at home right now, I'm guessing, because of lockdown. And one field that actually, because of the pandemic, will boom, in my opinion, is robotics and automation as a field, because reducing the contact of humans with each other is very important because of the corona thing right now. So robotics as a field is going to get a boom. I mean, not, computer science has always been a boom with AI and all, but robotics as a general field, mechatronics as a general field, is going to get a boom. So no, if you, the earlier you get into it, the better. And when it comes to learning, or not just learning robotics, not just learning robotics, even teaching robotics, more than the information itself, learning where to get the information is important. Because in my case, I have faced a lot of difficulty in obtaining places where to get the information from, because I knew that there were like these topics, like you had to learn this for this, etc., etc. Now, where do I learn it from? And this was one of the biggest hurdles. But once you cross that hurdle, in my opinion, it's very easy. You just have to keep on working on what you have learned and improve as a person. Okay, job loss of laborers. Uh, okay, now, okay, about the laborer thing. In India, as looking at the current situation, um, in India, actually, robotics might not see a high rate of acceptance, mainly because of the population. I mean, logically speaking, mainly because of the population, because we have a lot of people, and a lot of people, so labor is very easily accessible, more so unskilled labor. Most of the countries outside where robotics is being adopted, the field that robotics is taking is unskilled labor. But over here we have a lot of people, and the cost of installing a robot doesn't justify only like laying off so many other laborers. It's actually more. Cost of installing one robot is actually more than having like say 5 6 laborers do that task. So at least for this decade, I would say robotics might not have a good hold in the place of industry. But there are, it is gaining traction. There are actually a lot of initiatives taken by the government to support the uh, support robotics as a field. All right, and with this, we'll close the session. Thank you all for taking out the time to come today. I hope this has been helpful for all of you, and in some way has broadened your understanding of what the field is. And hey, if you are coming up to Manipal, then make sure to join IE Mechatronics. I mean, this is just open advertisement, but yeah. Uh, Also, we will be holding many other workshops like this in the future. So make sure to follow our social media pages, or Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And so yeah, we'll be holding a lot of workshops, not just workshops, in many events, not in webinars, and also offline events for those of you who are at MIT. So once again, thank you all for coming. Stay safe and have a good day.
Bye, sir. Stay safe. Take care. Thank you, sir.